welcome everybody to, I don't know, whatever, episode X, where X is the integer between like 0 and 20 of Lone Star Legacy. I'm your host for today, Sean Liu, and my co-hosts will be, if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah,
sure, I'm Joe Kington. We'll just talk over each other.
Yeah. In alphabetical order,
go next.
I'm Tim Everett. Diarrhea Soup on Twitter.
My name is Michael O'Malley. I don't really use social media, but I live in Austin. I'm part of the Lone Star Lurgoyfs Magic group.
Yeah, I think I introduced myself earlier, but I'll say it again. I'm Joe Kington. I have a Twitter account you can probably find if you dig hard enough, but I don't really do much with it. So I live in Houston and play Legacy. Yay.
Nice. I love it. We have like 0.25 Twitters on average amongst people in this Google Hangout.
Remember the Reddit thread where it got started? Just didn't bother to sign up.
Yeah. In any case, so you guys, I've explained all of you before, but to anybody who's listening now, I kind of wanted to go over what the sort of like the driving question or focus of this podcast is going to be. Sort of to boil it down, and feel free to comment on this, you guys. This might just be my perceptions, but I definitely feel as though there's been sort of a backlash towards the Legacy metagame recently. People tend to feel sort of negatively about it, and it's sort of reflected in a lot of places like Reddit and the Source. A lot of pros and high-level players have kind of been consistently down on certain aspects of the format. Sort of not only, it's all sorts of things like the dominance of blue brainstorm-based decks, or Deathright Shaman, or Grizzlebrand, Leovold, True Name Nemesis, and we'll kind of touch on all these as the podcast goes on. But I think at the end of the day, like, this is a powerful format doing powerful things, and I'm not sure how you guys feel, but I do feel as though that's perfectly within the bounds of what Legacy is supposed to be.
Yeah, you mentioned a whole bunch of things right there, and all of those four potential problems with the format converge into one deck, which is known as Check Pile, or maybe even Grixis Delver. So, I play Merfolk quite a bit. If it wasn't for True Name Nemesis, that would not be a deck in Legacy. So I don't think that's the problem. I don't think any of those one things by itself is a problem, but potentially these mid-range grind you out by these tiny little advantages. It gets tedious. Yeah.
Let me stop you for a second, because this is kind of a good place to start. Before we got into this, sort of like the meat of it all, I kind of wanted to talk about if we could go through what deck everybody plays and like how long you've been playing Legacy. Got a little questionnaire here, like how often do you play? Let's say, how often do you play? What's your favorite deck, and do you play any other formats? I guess starting with Tim, you said Merfolk.
Yeah, so I've been playing Legacy about 3 years. My first deck was Merfolk. I bought into Storm Components shortly thereafter. I don't like mid-range strategies. I either play Broken Combo, Merfolk, and I've recently delved into Blue-Red Standstill, which I have laid out in front of me, and I've been having an absolute blast with it.
Yeah, that deck is super spicy. I absolutely love those lists.
Yeah, I'm looking at the 15 main deck counterspells that I play in the deck, and it's with Snapcasters and 4 Sudden Shock and 4 Lightning Bolt. It's super sweet, man.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, who doesn't like to draw 3 cards? Come on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's draw 3 cards on it. The card clearly must be broken. See Burning Inquiry and Hatching Plans. So, Joe, what have you been up to recently? Tell everybody about yourself.
Yeah, so I mostly play Legacy. I play a little bit of Vintage. I keep on wanting to start playing Modern, but I've never really played much Modern. So keep any of my comments about Modern with that in mind. But here lately, I've been playing a lot of a kind of a blue-white Rest in Peace Helm combo deck, combo control sort of thing. Also play Food Chain a fair amount, and I used to always play 12 Post. That was my first Legacy deck. I've only really been playing Legacy for 3 years, I guess, something like that, two to three. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like playing it. It's a fun thing. I like mid range. I also like long, slow, grindy decks. That's the nice thing about Legacy. It's a little bit of everything, and you kind of get to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. You had a very interesting repertoire of decks. I was telling a friend of mine recently, like, I know a guy who started off on blue-green 12 Post, then decided he wanted to play Food Chain because those two are kind of similar, and then he decided he wanted to play something that could still play Mist Hologriffins that wasn't Food Chain. And so he ended up at this homebrew of blue-white Helm combo with Rest in Peace Energy Field and main deck Mist Hologriffin.
I've taken out the main deck Mist Hologriffins, but they are really good with Rest in Peace.
That's such a bummer. I thought that was the greatest thing. I really appreciated that piece of spice. But yeah.
So I think that just leaves me to go around the circle here.
Really too much about you. I know you play in the Austin scene, but what have you been up to? How often do you play? What are your favorite decks?
So yeah, I've been playing Legacy off and on. I actually looked up my TCG player order history to pin down the date before this cast. I built Manaless Dredge in 2013 in July, apparently, and that was the first Legacy deck because it was probably about like $150 to get all the cards at that time. And that was after trying Modern, not really liking it at the time, but it took me a lot longer to actually get like what you might call "quote unquote" a real deck in the format. That was shortly before I moved to Austin, and I got here and I realized there's a really good scene here. I started just like hanging out, going to events, and just kind of slowly accumulated some dual lands, some staples. I ended up with my first non-Manaless Dredge deck was like a kind of like Lingering Souls Stoneforge Mystic kind of black, green, white deck. It wasn't that good, and I was also not very familiar with the format. Maybe I just kind of doing more of the same. I accumulated some more cards, and I got into like Maverick, and also Death and Taxes. So I played those for a little while. And then I transitioned into Agrolome, and I played that. That was my most recent deck, and the deck that I played the most in Legacy, I had the most experience with and most success with. That's for anyone who doesn't understand the name. That's the it's like 4-color Loam, or sometimes SCG coverage or Wizards coverage just calls it 4-color Abzan. It's a Mox Diamond, Chalice of the Void, Knight of the Reliquary deck, along with Light from the Loam and Punching Card. Basically, everything you can do that's not blue that's good in the format is in that deck. And then just recently, so I actually kind of had been not feeling very enthusiastic about Legacy because I've just been playing the same deck for so long. But with some outside of Magic stuff going on in my life that was good, I finally have taken the plunge and bought a bunch of blue cards. So I just got everything I needed to play Grixis Delver and also Blue-Red Delver. I can build both those decks now. So for the last like couple weeks, I've been playing quite a bit over each week, as many times as I can, basically, and kind of grinding Grixis Delver, trying to learn, just unlearn the habits or learn the new things about it. But because I got a new deck, I just want to play Legacy like every day. And unfortunately, it's not quite possible, but Austin scene is very good. There's at least 3, possibly now a 4th has been added in this last week, times a week that you can play a Legacy FNM type event, like 4 rounds. So yeah, I'm trying to get as much practice as I can, but I'm enjoying it a lot. I really enjoy casting Brainstorm. I like Grixis Delver a lot. I'm excited to try Blue-Red Delver because I haven't actually sleeved it up and played any matches with it. But yeah, that's kind of my perspective on the format here.
Yeah, no, that sounds really awesome. I mean, first of all, welcome to the Brainstorm Club. I guess that's like 60% of the format, but it's definitely one of those like quintessential Legacy experiences where you sometimes have these games where it's like, man, I'm holding a fistful of lands and I'm pretty sure I'm just dead on board. Then you cast a Brainstorm, draw into like, I don't know, triple lightning bolts or like Force of Will blue card and Gurmag Angler, and all of a sudden it's just like, oh wait a second, like I have no business winning this game, and yet like this almost feels like cheating, but you know, a win is a win. I'll take it.
Right. It's definitely a completely different way to play the game.
Mm.
I think that's one thing too that Legacy has. A lot of other formats, to some degree, don't. I mean, Vintage certainly can go that way sometimes, but Vintage is very different. But it's. I feel like you're much more likely to have a big swing. Kind of, you know, the game can swing around very quickly at the very tail end of things. I feel like more than most other formats, you're at one life and look like you're dead on board, and then you manage to pull it off and that only happens in certain decks. But there's a lot of other things where it's just like you can stabilize and come back from a lot of situations that you just never could otherwise. And a lot of that's brainstorm. I mean, honestly, brainstorm and fetch, and you can get out of a lot of things. But even with non-blue decks, I mean, you've got a lot of tools, a lot more toolboxy kind of options and different things. I think that other formats are more restricted in. Not to say they don't have those things; they certainly do. But I feel like Legacy swings around a lot more often. Mm-hmm. That may just be my general perception.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I don't play too much Standard or Modern, which is it's actual zero. But yeah, I mean, I think Legacy is kind of an interesting format in that, like, because things are so powerful. I think the perception from the outside of the format is that people tend to believe it's more of like like we reveal our hands on turn one, and then we determine who wins the game based off of like what 7 cards we turn face up. And it's like, yeah, you get those games where someone goes turn 1 probe, then a couple of cards later tendrils you for 20, or like turn 1 Ancient Tomb, Lotus Petal, Show and Tell, with force backup, put in an Emrakul. But like those are by and far the minority of games. Like most of the games are highly interactive. There's a lot of back and forth going on. Very rarely is it just like a blowout in one direction or the other. And if it is, it's usually more an issue of like player skill. Like there's always sort of like the apocryphal story of the guy who goes, turn 1, island, brainstorm main phase. Turn 2, play another island, brainstorm. And then later on he goes on to say that, this format's garbage, brainstorm's not really a good card. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why everyone likes this format so much. It's like, well, maybe that's your fault, just a little bit.
Yeah, it took me building Blue-Red Delver. That was my first real brainstorm deck. And I remember just like sitting there in the match and just I turned to this guy who was watching the match. I was like, God, brainstorm fetch land is so fucking good. It's like, it's just, it felt so powerful. And yeah, and Mike, I'm excited for you.
Yeah, I was playing a lot of other games when I wasn't feeling so hot about format. All it took was, I mean, don't anybody listening out there take this as like, oh, hey, just spend all your money on blue cards. Like it's the best thing ever. But like my real point is that like, if you're not feeling so good about a format, maybe try changing decks. I mean, obviously in Legacy that's more difficult because the price of admission is so high, like actual, like, you know, real world money wise. But I can't stop thinking about the like playing Magic and like the format and just like trying to get better. It's just awesome.
Yeah, it's a really exciting place to be. I don't know. I mean, I think we all were there at one point, and it kind of just comes and goes. I guess very quickly, for those who don't know, I've been playing Legacy for about 5 years. High Tide the first 2, Infect the last 3. And I'm kind of at a point where it's like, I don't really know what I'm doing right now. So I definitely envy you, Mike, in that you're in this position where you're excited about Legacy and looking forward to going to your next weekly all the time. Whereas I showed up with Mentor Deathblade 1 week, Nyx Fit the week after that, Rug Delver the week after that, and it's just like, this is not. I mean, I'm like, I played Infect for several years, and I do love the deck, but it's just like because of meta shifts and stuff, and that's not something I'm not here to complain and whine about the top ban or anything, but I do feel as though I've kind of been displaced, and I'm sort of looking for my niche in the meta right now.
Yeah, when Tim starts talking about 4 Sudden Shock main deck.
Oh God, yeah.
Sean loses his erection for.
And Mike, I'm sure your friend Stu. I mean, I guess our friend Stu might have told you this, but we were playing in a tournament for a dual land, and he just busts out like a main deck Malira against me. And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like this is what I have to beat?"
Oh man, that's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's Stuart for you though. What a guy. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, I
Shout
love
out
the
to
guy. Super nice dude. He's been on the cast a couple of times, more so than all of us actually. I think. Ugh.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's true. He was kind of the catalyst for this whole thing to get started, as far as I'm aware.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, really great guy and really awesome of him to put everything together. But moving on with this cast a little bit, so I think we've kind of touched on a lot of different things that I do want to talk about at some point. But let's kind of approach it like bit by bit, we'll say. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was what is in particular that you guys like about Legacy. And I think Mike was the one who touched on that the most. But if we want to go in order again, Tim, how do you like what is it that you love most about Legacy compared to
Um,
say other formats?
I just love Magic, and Legacy. I would say I don't know. I guess right now, modern, Legacy, and Vintage are kind of all tied for my affection right now. All for different reasons. I guess Legacy is the one I know the best and I feel most comfortable with, and generally the decks that I play, I know pretty well. Um, I, I like counter spells, and so blue is really good in Legacy, and so I like doing that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to be said about like, I mean, obviously the degenerate combos really like appeal to certain people, but at the same time, like, I want to be playing a format where I have access to free counter spells. Like I want that Force of Will, I want that Daze, I want that Fluster Storm. I don't want to be dead in the water when the guy goes turn one duress you or like turn one land grant. Here we go.
Yeah, I like I like playing blue decks where Force of Will is always live. That's why I really like Merfolk. You don't you feel okay. You could jam in a misdirection in there in Legacy, which is not great in Legacy, but it's always going to be live, and even more so in Vintage. Yeah, and that's like if I were to try to play Grixis Delver or Check Pile, and I see a lot of these lists now are just running like two or three Force of Will main. It just seems kind of gross. Like I want four Force of Will main deck, and I always want them to be live. Um, and when you're not playing Brainstorm as in Merfolk, you've got so many blue cards where it's always good.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the first time I saw the check pile lists, I thought I think the original Thomas Marr list was putting like three lightning bolts, and I thought that must have been a typo. Like that's not something people do. You don't play three lightning bolts, and like I think three forcible is a little bit more defensible, just because the blue count can be a little bit iffy. But um, yeah, these cards or these decks rather, especially with like brainstorm, you kind of get into this place where you don't really have to play the full four of a card in order to see it. Like the Eldrazi decks are playing four, sometimes play like four Leyline of the Void in their sideboards because they don't have access to like, oh, I'm going to play 1 to 2 surgicals and 1 or 2 Grafdigger's Cages and eventually find them with my 4 Brainstorms and 4 Ponders and Gitaxian Probes and Preordains.
Yeah, that's definitely like a kind of a thing about the format that I actually I think about like quite a bit, I guess. Like I don't know, so let's like wind back time just for the purposes of this for a second. Maybe like what 3 maybe 4 years in Legacy and look at some deck lists. Not saying we actually do, but if you do that, you're gonna see deck lists that don't look like things like Check Pile. Like Check Pile is like an aberration in the context of Legacy. You haven't really been able to put together decks that can literally be the name of the deck, just have the word pile in it. Like pile is supposed to be like a derogatory term that we use for a deck that's just like a collection of cards that you threw together. But that's literally what the deck is. And like the counterpoint to what I'm talking about, I guess, is like, or about to check pile, is something like Rug Delver, which since the printing of Delver of Secrets has basically had like 54 set cards, and then you have like some flex slots that have honestly been whittled away at over the last couple of years, since the last time that deck was really like that relevant in the tier 1 meta. But I mean, if you look at other decks during that time, it was like the decks seemed more like, I mean, if you look at the list on paper anyways, it seemed more like it just looked more neat, you know, like you had a lot of like 4 ofs and maybe like a 2
It's a very like streamlined list, and like you can tell what it's trying to do.
Yeah. But check pile is just like, well, we're going to play 4 of the best creature in the format, and then whatever else you want in 4 colors, because we absolutely can. And I mean, on the one hand, like it's not like it's that terrible to play against, but it's sort of like the principle of the matter that sort of bothers me, just because it's like whoever like, I mean, it's the only like big leap in deck building that somebody had to make was to realize that you could do that, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh well, now the world is my oyster. I can just throw whatever I want in there, and there's like almost no creativity. Like, I don't know, or like no artistry in deck design. But I mean, I'm not gonna try to say whether that's a good or a bad thing. That's just more of like, I think that's how it is. But I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about that yet.
Well, I mean, that's also one of the nicer things. I mean, the good thing and bad thing about Legacy is you have card selection. I mean, that both in the sense you have a lot of cards available, not necessarily playable, but you have, a huge number of cards to pull from, sets to pull from. But you've got a huge number of cantrips, huge number of card filtering, particularly if you're in blue. But even if you're not, you've got options. Less so now that the top is gone. I'm still bitter about that. But anyway, there's a lot of things you can do. I actually think Check Pile is a really interesting deck, just because it is kind of all these like, you take the top played cards Legacy and put them in one deck, but it actually works. I think that's kind of a testament to one of the nicer things about the format. You can take a lot of things, and if you're a pro and you're trying to get every last edge out, you gravitate towards something that looks a lot like Check Pile. But you can play a lot of interesting, spicy stuff and catch people off guard, and honestly win a lot of games you shouldn't, because you can play a lot of kind of spicy one-ups when you have enough card filter to pull it off. I mean, there's a lot of these. I think it's something that Check Pile in particular does very well, is they have a lot of situational cards and then just enough cantrips to find them and bind it all together, and it's what makes a deck effective. I actually think it's a well-built deck in that sense. I mean, I have no problem with it really, but just my thoughts anyway.
How do you guys?
It's like an interesting issue though, right? Because it's I almost feel like it is sort of like the Borg from Star Trek, and that like it is just sort of assimilating every new card that's making its way into the format. Like Fatal Push is pretty good. Hey, let's go and bring that into Check Pile, And then before that, I think like K Command might have been like the last Legacy playable like card before Fatal Push, and it's like or I guess like a Braid, but even that's more of like you play it for the flexibility, not necessarily the power level. But K Command definitely is just like 2 for 1, and stuff like that is always going to find its way into these Check Pile lists. Leovold as well. That's something that's not an instant or sorcery, but it's just like it's just 3 colors, no problem. Like we can definitely play it, and so it's got sort of like this homogenizing like birthing pot effects, which again, like it's not. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. It is what it is. But I think that's something to be a little bit wary of when it's like birthing pod was banned in Modern, and one of the main reasons they cited was because it just prevented Wizards from printing better creatures. And so now we're at a point where, because the fixing in Legacy is so good, you can point to the fetch lands, the duels, Deathrite Shaman, the cantrips reliably find you everything you need. Like whatever it is, I think it's all part of the problem. But at the end of the day, that's something you kind of have to be wary of as well. I think sort of an interesting parallel to Check Pile is that weird 4 Deathrite, 4 Hierarch, 4 True Name, 4 Stoneforge deck going around.
Yeah.
And it's like Abrupt Decays and 2 Leovolds and Swords of Plowshares and Stoneforge Mystic. And this is like, I mean, I get what you guys mean. The deck feels like an abomination sometimes. I played that to several top 4s at my at like weeklies, and every time I was playing it, it's just like, yeah, we'll go turn 1, Swamp Deathrite, turn 2, cast Stoneforge Mystic, and plow your guy with double white, and then turn 3, play a Leovold. And it's like, what the fuck just happened? Like Leovold waste you. It's like, well, what happened? This isn't something like, I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't say like this isn't something that shouldn't happen, but it's just, it feels very, we're almost entering like a new age of Legacy at this point, where I think like these good stuff decks are going to be like, they're here and they're good and they're probably going to be around for a while. I just don't think they're quite like, because like they are interactive, they're not taking up too much of the meta share. Worse things have definitely come across the Legacy metagame that haven't been bans. I do think Countertop was really, really awful for the format in a lot of ways. But, you know, these decks, I like love them or hate them. I think they're going to be here for a while.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely, like I was saying, like I think we need to, like, as Legacy players, try to like rein in our emotions about it. Any like thoughts you have, like I do, like we were saying, like the deck lists just look like abominations. But I mean, the truth is that's what you get when you have that, like the way the game works, the way this card game works. Like when you have cards like Ponder and Brainstorm and Shuffle effects, like that's just how it works. Like I think it's the natural progression. I mean, it's not like good stuff decks haven't existed for a long time. Like basically, like, you know, they printed like Stoneforge Mystic, and you had it's probably honestly it really started there, in my opinion, as far as I know. I read those articles that I forget the guy's name, Andrew something, wrote a bunch, and then Bob Huang has wrote the last 2 about the history of Legacy. They're great articles, Channel Fireball articles. If anybody out there is curious, I highly recommend them. But just like the articles about the earlier days of the format and like talking about the decks and like, you know, I mean, it's almost like Legacy is still like maturing as a format, but maybe this is like, this is just where we're at now. Like you just have like decks with a lot of 1-ofs and 2-ofs, and like, because you can, and maybe in the early days, like people were still influenced by like how they thought the game should be played, but we have the benefit of everyone's experience and all this, like, you know, internet record keeping about it, that we can develop things like the 4-color good stuff decks. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think a lot of the sort of unhappiness, we'll say, with the format is a lot of the older players, and I was really hoping to get somebody like that. Like I know Sam Craven's been playing for a very long time, but you know, all things considered, I think we're relatively newer players to the format. I think I've been playing longer than, you know, any of you 3 at like 5 years, but even then, like, the format's been around basically since the beginning of Magic, or I would say like whenever it split off from Vintage, but that was like still in the 1990s. And so the format's just had a really long history. People have been involved in it for a very long time. I almost want to call it Stockholm Syndrome in some ways, where it's like, yeah, we want to play our like really strong cards, but we don't want to play those really strong cards. It's like, well, you know, get with the times. We're sorry. As long as we're not printing like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time again, like 25% meta representation of Blue-Red Delver, I think like things are still going to be okay.
I think this is a good time to plug our bi-weekly Vintage tournament that we have in Houston, Texas. You want to play with all the good cards? We play the first and third Sundays of every month at Brash Brewery. Bring $10 cash for entry fee. Bring $10 cash if you want to throw down on pizza. And their beers are kind of strong, so plan your transportation accordingly.
And for those of us that don't know, we're based in Houston, Texas. If you're a little bit further away than that, that's okay. But if you ever find yourself in town, we'd love to have you. 100% Proxy Vintage is a blast and doesn't involve, I don't know, the equivalent of like a down payment on a house to get into the format.
I was brewing a deck with Roshin Meanderer today. So just to let you know what kind of decks people are playing, so stay tuned.
This is what makes me excited for Sunday here.
Yeah, Vintage is sweet. I've actually only played it a tiny bit, like maybe some. I guess I'll plug the Austin event right now as well. The date is going to be the 24th. That's a Saturday. It is going to be at Austin Beer Works in Austin. $10 entry, 100% proxies. And I'll echo the recommendations that Tim gave about transportation, because it is a brewery and it's kind of hard to get anywhere without using a car in Austin if you are staying here or you just happen to be in town. But we'll do a full-on. I'll pull up the actual event page and we'll do a real plug at the end of the cast. But Vintage. That's something I've also only very recently dabbled in. Both at two of the previous Austin-based 100% proxy tournaments that we've had. I mean, it's great. I'm still like barely touched the tip of the iceberg, but you want to play those things that we can't have anymore in any other formats, that's where you got to go.
Like Channel Fireball.
Yeah. I mean, we are the Lone Star Lorgoyfs. This is Lone Star Legacy. For those of you that don't know, Texas is a Lone Star state, so we're going to be having events. I think so far we're mostly centered in Houston and Austin, but I mean, we love our Eternal formats. We love our Legacy. We love our Vintage. Even Modern's looking pretty interesting right now. I will say that much. Not that we are a Modern podcast, but I guess we can talk about. You guys want to talk about that? Talk about the unbannings?
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't.
Yeah, we have the elephant hanging out in the corner of the room,
Yeah, well, it's really interesting though, because I love these two cards, Jace the Mind Sculptor and Bloodbraid Elf. I think they add like really interesting dimensions to the game. Like, you guys have all seen bad Miracles players in Legacy, and you just kind of shake your head a little bit at the guy who slams a Jace and then like slams it on like an unfavorable board and then starts like taking it up, trying to like outrace his opponent. And it's just like, I don't know. Or like the person who's like brainstorming without fetch lands, or the guy who's running. I don't know. Put it this way: there's a lot of skill to that card, and so I think anything that's going to add a new differentiator of like skilled players versus unskilled players is going to be good for any format it's in. And I say that, and now I'm thinking maybe Bloodbraid Elf isn't the most skillful card, but I also just love 2-for-1s. So
Bloodbraid Elf is pretty sweet.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, red green Ponza, right? Like, who doesn't want to play a 3/2 haster into a Stone Rain? But here, a little bit on topic. Let me ask you guys, since we are, I think, sort of a more legacy-oriented podcast, what do you guys think of the idea that this will encourage players to make the transition from Modern into Legacy?
I don't really see that happening. If they get their first taste of quote unquote brainstorming, I don't think it's really going to push Modern players into Legacy just because of the barrier to entry. It's just so fucking expensive.
I guarantee you'll have at least one person threatened to. I mean, I fully predict that it will cause some people to shift over. Whether or not it's more than shift over normally than you're given random time, I have no idea. But I don't know. I mean, I think anytime you change a format, people move to other formats. I don't know if it'll be a huge number, but I'm really curious to see. I do think it's. I mean, it makes one more Legacy staple that's also a Modern staple. That also means that those of us who didn't bother to get a full play set of Jaces back when they were $50 are now regretting it. But I mean, that's part of it. I think the more overlap you have between the staples in each format, the more likely you are to have people migrate. So I think there is something to be said for that.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with both Joe and Tim in that I don't think it's going to drive that many people to play just because I think maybe the reasons that these two cards that just got unbanned would drive someone to leave Modern. Like anyone who's like rationally thinking about it is probably going to assume that, well, those things exist in Spades and Legacy. Like, why would I want to go do that? That was a horrible experience in Modern. But I mean, you'll still get like some people who don't think like that. I don't know. Like I don't really play Modern, so I don't really know a whole lot about the format or like what this really means. But the kind of points that I've heard people make about at least Jace, because it seems like the consensus among Modern players is that like Bloodbraid Elf is fine and honestly probably not even good enough to make an impact. Even though I think it's debatable because it's still a great 4-drop. Jace is like, I think there's still a lot of people who maybe have a bad taste in their mouth from having played Standard when Jace was legal in Standard. Because basically at that point you were playing Stoneblade. Every matchup was just playing Stoneblade every time. Because that format had cantrips, it had fetch lands, it had Stoneforge Mystic, and it had Jace, among other like. I mean, honestly, it was a great format. It was one of the coolest Standard formats I've ever seen. But there was there was problems in that Jace was really expensive, and you kind of wanted it for most of the best decks. But the argument that the main point that people have been making that I've heard of is that in Modern you don't have good ways to protect a Jace, so it's not like you can just tap out on turn 4 for a Jace and expect to win the game quite like you can in Legacy, depending on what your hand is. Like in Legacy, there's decks that have been sculpting their hand the entire time that they've been dropping lands, and all of a sudden they've got all the protection they could ever want. And they can afford to tap out, but you don't have free counterspells like that in Modern. So if you try to do that, you're probably gonna lose. So it's like we started this little segue about Jace, in that you're gonna get to watch, if you play Modern, get to watch a lot of people make like just like ridiculously bad plays involving Jace. Like they're not gonna know what they're doing. And I mean, maybe you think that's funny. Like I don't know. I don't know.
No, I mean, I don't mean it as a slight against Modern players at all. Maybe there's a little bit of Schadenfreude going on there, but there's a part of me that does love watching bad players play any format, which isn't really good for the, call it a guilty pleasure. I don't think it's good for the format or the local scene in any way, but yeah, I don't know. That besides that point though, yeah, I mean, I think I'm a little bit less high on the idea. I definitely thought there might be a little bit of overlap between Modern players and Legacy players, just on the basis of Jace the Mind Sculptor. But after hearing you guys like talk about it, you know, I'm also kind of reminded of how Eternal Masters was sort of, people were saying, yeah, this is going to lower the cost of entry. It's going to bring a bunch of people in, and like, I don't know about you guys, I don't remember anybody in our shop starting Legacy because of Eternal Masters, and certainly not Vintage.
Picked up a lot of cards around then.
Yeah, I think it was already like pre-enfranchised players that were stoked about the reprints. I don't remember anybody getting into it anew from one of those, and until they reprint the duels, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think you might be waiting a while for that one. But reserve list aside, let's get back to Legacy. I've got a couple of questions for you guys, and I'm kind of curious to hear what you think about them. And I'm sure some of you guys know, I definitely wanted a couple of people who'd be interested in doing this podcast, because this was a topic I thought was very interesting, but I did want like people at different places in their Magic career, so to speak. So I thought Mike O'Malley was a really good person to bring on the cast just because he'd recently gotten into Blue. I think him is another very interesting person because he's been playing traditionally like not tier 1 decks. Same with Joe, but you know, I think
he means that as a nice thing.
Sorry? Well, sorry, I missed that.
No, I'm just saying you mean that as a compliment.
No, absolutely. I think it's fantastic. Like, I mean, especially the way things are now. Like, I don't know. Like, sometimes you go to the shop and it's just like, yeah, you you are either playing against Grixis Delver or you are playing against some sort of all-in combo deck. And they're strong, like they're good decks, but sometimes the matchups just feel so, oh god, like I picked up lands last week and I had to play against Ben on Sneak and Show, and I've never felt a matchup so lopsided in my life. Like that might as well have just been like a draft deck against Belcher or something. It was just it felt terrible. No, but I love and that's kind of one of the things about Legacy, definitely like less true these days where the cards, because they're so strong in their respective roles, there used to be trade-offs. It's like, do I want to play Nimble Mongoose as my fair beat, or do I want to play Knight of the Reliquary? These days, a lot of that really comes to, coalesces into True Name Nemesis, Leovold, Deathrite Shaman. But at the same time, I still think there is that element of, even if not as wide open as before, there's that element of like rogue deck building where you can show up to the shop with like this crazy deck. And you guys, I don't know if you looked up the most recent NTGO challenge that took place this past Sunday, which I think was February 11th.
The decks are pretty unique.
You've seen this, right? You've seen this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks incredible.
Yeah, I saw
I was so shocked. I think first place was taken by, I don't even remember, but second place was
blue-red. There's
the blue-red nonsense deck, and it looked amazing. We had like one main deck Blood Moon, one main deck Electrolyze, one sideboard Keranos, 4 main deck counter spells. The only creatures in the deck were like 4 Snapcasters, 3 Vendilion Clicks. Like
it isn't Snapcaster in there. I think it may have been a sideboard, but he definitely had Izzet Snapcaster.
Okay, yeah. It just looked like someone took their favorite blue and red cards and stuck them together in a deck. And I mean, just the nature of the format. I promise you, this is somebody who knows how to play Magic very well. I don't know who this is, but just being able to play strong cards like that haven't existed in that pattern before, and then just sort of being able to leverage player skill in a way that lets you beat people. Like, I don't think anyone's contending that this deck is all like, the new hot thing and this is going to be better than Check Pile and say goodbye to your Delver decks or whatever. But, like, it really is, I don't know, like, how you guys feel. It's incredibly heartwarming to me to see decks like that do really well.
Well, this is one thing I think actually is a real strength of Legacy, and this goes back to, like it or leave it, the strength of blue and the cantrips you have there. And I think it happens with non-blue decks too, but you can really take things. I know the current thing is around sort of this, 4-color control check polish deck, but you can take that basic shell of how many cantrips do we run, how many mana dorks do we run. You can do a heck of a lot with that. And I think people are focusing an awful lot on, these decks are around, and not thinking about how do we do something different with that same shell. And I think there's like that blue-red deck's a good example of that. But even like there was a Turbo Mill deck that went 5-0 here a while back that was super sweet. I am completely going to build that here soon because I realized I have most of it except for some random cheap stuff. So I think there's a lot when you have. Yeah, I mean, Legacy's not a format that people think of as something you can brew in, but I really think it is. I mean, I think it's you have shells, you have things that work well together, but within that, you can really do some very different stuff. Admittedly, you're pushed towards blue, but you can do a lot with that.
Right, I agree with that. I think that maybe one of the reasons for the fact that you can actually brew in Legacy is just the fact that like there isn't really there isn't a pro scene. Yeah, there's some pros that play Legacy, and there's some like high top events. But I mean, I think the key point is that it's not a pro tier format, and that means that there isn't as much like from the top down like information about what is supposed to be good that gets disseminated. Like, I mean, this kind of digs into like a whole like kind of maybe even outside of Magic issue just about how people think about games like this in general. But like, are we right to just be like, oh well, this deck won a tournament, but and it's been winning a lot of tournaments, but does that mean that this is what we should be doing, or should we try to attack it? Like, I don't know if that's like the best way to really describe how I'm like thinking here, but like with social media, we have like infinite access to information, but that just leads to a lot of people like copy pasting and just like sleeving up. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to say that this is wrong. I do it too. Like my Drixus Doubler list, I totally just went on MTG Goldfish and like found lists, and I made some tweaks here and there, but like I started with what somebody else did and had success with. But like, does that mean that's right? Like, I don't necessarily think so. But we're conditioned to see like someone who did it successfully and someone who maybe we already know is like a really good at the game, and be like, oh well, if they did it, then that must be right. But I mean, I think Magic is a great game in general because that mentality does exist, and a lot of times it is correct, but it's not always 100% correct.
Yeah, and I think I'd agree with both of you guys. Times where it's like I will see a deck online that did pretty well, and then I will immediately think to myself, like, this deck looks awful. Like, I don't understand how this deck wins matches. I think the most recent time I did this, I mean no disrespect to Hani Aldemar, but I was looking at his list from Eternal Weekend, which is 4 Deathrights, 4 Stoneforges, 4 Monastery Mentors, along with 4 Gitaxian Probes and 4 Cabal Therapies. And I looked at it and it just looked clunky to me. I took it to a weekly, and this is kind of where I think, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with net decking, but I do think it's up to us to be, like, constantly critical and analytical of, like, what it is that's being presented to us. You'll sometimes see, like, for example, like a Miracles is playing, like, 1 Hallowed Fountain instead of, like, 1 Tundra, and you think to yourself, like, that can't be optimal, can it? Like, what is... I mean, there's almost no reason to do that. I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything outside of, like, what, Death Shadow maybe? And that's not even like a real card. You're not playing that in Miracles. But, you know, it's up to us to sort of look at that and be like, okay, this is sort of like something somebody won with. Is it because they're good at Magic, or is it because the deck is good, or is it because they just got lucky? Or is it just some combination of all three? And
or just
by the way,
yeah, a metagame call. Like in the shop that we play in Houston, a lot of Death and Taxes, Eldrazi, a sprinkling of Delver, and then a bunch of combo.
So, yeah. Oh god, yeah. So this is a tough place to be right now. I mean, I love my city. I love my shop dearly, but you can only get through one Blood Moon so many times before it starts to chip away at your soul a little bit.
You also got 2 people regularly showing up with Pox, so there's that too. So.
Dear God.
Yeah.
2 people can really play it well too.
Pox is like the fishing line of decks. It's just like you see him like wrapping it around so slowly, and he's taking these steps towards you, and he just kind of gently puts it over your neck, and it's not too bad at first, but after a while you find you can't breathe, and he doesn't let go. 40 minutes later, you go to game 2. I mean, there's something to be said about. I'm okay with losing to that one though, and I will admit the hypocrisy there. But I have a thing for $300 enchantments from Legends that are black for whatever reason.
They're pretty sweet.
Oops. Yeah. On the flip side of that, though, I do think, and let me know what you guys think of this. But this is sort of an idea that I've been tossing around. I think, like. I don't know if you guys do any sort of like console gaming or like PC gaming or anything like that, but there's sort of this idea that like it's sort of what we're talking about, where if pro players or high level players do something, it's like copying them isn't necessarily seen as like a good thing. And what I mean by that is like a lot of people just sort of will, I think to a much lesser extent to a much greater extent than they do in Magic, but they'll sort of say like, oh, like you're just a sheep, you need to think for yourself, you need to do things like, independently instead of just copying the best players in the game. I feel as though the legacy greats that have proven themselves tournament after tournament deserve some respect for us. I think the community is not very good about stopping and thinking, well, wait a second, this guy consistently puts up top 8s. If he's doing something that I disagree with, maybe there's something to it. And so I guess another, like the example of that I'm really thinking of is like, there's a good number of pros that think Deathrat Shaman should be banned, which that's not what this like podcast is about at all. I'm personally on the fence about it. I can see pros and cons for it, but like I regularly see Bob Huang sort of talking about. And for those who don't know, he's a very notable Grixis Delver player, very proficient with the deck. Regularly makes top 8s of like 100-person, like multi-100-person tournaments, and he's on the record as just being one of the most vocal people advocating for a Deathrite Shaman ban. And it's just a little bit like dismaying for me to see people say like, oh, like this is just one guy and he's always trying to push this agenda and he's writing these like really opinionated articles in order to like generate clicks. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Like maybe this guy who's played Deathrite Shaman like more times than you have or ever will, and brought it to more successful tournament finishes than you have or ever will have, knows something about the format that you don't know.
I think we have to dive into this because that's one of the things that I've been thinking about leading up to this cast, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I read that article. I managed to catch a Bob Huang stream the other day when he was playing Grixis Delver. And I also heard a player in my local shop in Austin, Pat's Games, one of the better legacy players in the area that I know of, one of the best I know of actually, talking, and he was echoing what Bob Huang says, so that how it's just like the card is just like, it's just too good. Like I mean, it doesn't seem oppressive. It's just like so versatile and powerful for 1 mana that it's insane. Like he gave the example that, like, so he played in a SCG Dallas not too long ago, and he played a Bug Delver list. He didn't play Grixis because he wanted all his lands to be able to cast Deathrite Shaman, which should tell you something about the card. And he was saying that like basically the number of games that he played where he would just like turn 1 Deathrite, turn 2 Wasteland, and just like be in like completely impossible for him to lose the game as long as he like doesn't make a critical error, was just too many to count. And it's just like, because you're just like so far ahead by that point in the early turns that it's just like it's all in the back of that one drop, you know, that one mana 1/2. But I mean, I agree with that. And you mentioned some like other games, like PC games, console games, like whatever. Like, I mean, maybe we're talking about League of Legends. It doesn't really matter what we're talking about. I agree with that.
That's my jam right there.
I agree with that. That the player base often has a tendency to dislike the idea of a meta like coalescing into like a set like kind of rock paper scissors thing. But I mean, it does kind of depend on the quality of the design of the game that you're talking about, because I've played like online computer games that there's that same sentiment exists in players that like, oh well, I don't want to like I want to be my special, I want to be special, like I want to like do my own thing. But because of the way the game is designed, it's like literally it's just solved. Like there's a best thing you can be doing and everything else is just suboptimal. And like if you don't care about winning, then that's fine. But like really, why are you playing like a game again that's PvP, player versus player, if you don't want to win? Like if you just want to get wrecked by other people, like I don't know. Like I've dealt with this before in other games, and it's just like I can't fathom it because I like winning. That's one of the main reasons that I play games like this. But back to my point about the quality of design, like Magic has especially Legacy, because we have the benefit of like years and years of like really, really talented people coming up with cards, like all just thrown in a big old like, you know, like room full of Rubbermaid buckets. Like here's all the toys you get to play with, like have fun. And it's much less solved than a lot of other formats, but at the same time, like you were saying, we probably should give credence to what these people who consistently win large tournaments in this game that has like a significant random element, like they're doing something right. And if you look at the results and say, oh, I still think that's not right, like, well, why are you playing Magic? Because it's a game about winning. Like that's the only thing that really matters in it. Like, in my opinion, anyways. I don't know. Maybe that's not the best way to say it, but I mean, no, like there it is. I'll throw it out there.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. Like on a personal level, I definitely agree with you. Or like in that is how I feel. But at the same time, you know, like I think it's a little bit short-sighted to say like if you're not playing to win, why are you playing? I played Nyx Fit recently. It's not a good deck. It's really bad, in fact. And I'm really surprised that Paragon City Games shout out to those guys. They run a great stream, but I'm really surprised they managed to 5-0 with it, to be honest. Like, I'm not really certain. Like, how many people can you run into that don't realize that Deathrite Shaman can exile Academy Rector to prevent it from putting enchantment into play? I digress, but like, I think, I mean, there are of course other reasons to play the game, but at the same time, it's a little bit like you can't have your cake and eat it too. And what I mean by that is like you can't like win the majority of your games against high level players, and at the same time bring your like, your little like unique snowflake deck that nobody else has seen before. There are people who are better than you at Magic, smarter than you in general, I hope, and have way more free time on their hands, who are constantly trying to crack this puzzle that is the meta. And then, if you're going to, like, if you want to bring a homebrew to FNM or to your Legacy Weekly, that's awesome. I think that's really awesome and like really brave of you. And like, I will cheer you on the entire time. Even if I play against you, I will be a little bit sad if I win. But
shout out, Joe.
Joe's the worst about this. Like, I had to play against him. Oh my god! Like, I was playing Lands the other week, and he's like, "Yeah, I've got 4 mana deck. Rest in peace." Like, the entire tournament, just like, please, I don't want to play. I don't want to play against Joe. But like, personal, like, petty personal motivations aside, like, I think that's, what Joe does is absolutely awesome. Like, he has other cards. He can play, like, I don't know, you want to call like higher tier decks that consistently perform better in the metagame at like larger tournaments. But like, at the end of the day, this is just a game. We do what we want to, we have fun. We're all different people. We have fun in different ways. And ultimately, I think it's up to us to, determine what it is we find fun about the game. Whether that be like you want to express yourself in the game, like in the decks you play. Like, I think Tim is like our Merfolk guy. That's like sort of tied into his identity. Or if you feel a little bit more like Mike O'Malley, for example, who feels as though like winning is the most, like, where you derive the most joy from this game.
Well, I mean, here's the counterpoint to that. Just to be fair, is the pros aren't playing the same game you are in a lot of ways. They are extremely good, and not to say that, like, I mean, Sean, you're an amazing player. It's just that I'm not at the level they are. I'm not at the level you are, honestly. The deck that they play best is the deck that's going to let them leverage their skill set the most. And like, yeah, you want a good deck. I mean, Grixis Delver honestly is kind of absurdly good, and you don't, like, you can misplay with it, and you can lose a lot because you misplay with it. But it is an extremely good deck, even in the absence of a skilled player. I feel like it's not like a dummy deck, but it's tolerant to misplays in a way that other decks aren't. But I mean, they're looking for a deck that maximizes what they can do, and I think the flip side of that is it's important to play a deck that you can play to the best of your ability, and whether that's the one you're most familiar with, or the one that fits your play style the best, or the one that you make the fewest mistakes with, whatever it may be. I mean, the deck that you're going to play the best with is not necessarily the deck that's the best out there in the format, and I think that's important to point out too. Like, if I were to play Lands or Grixis Delver, or actually, I think I could play Check Pile. Maybe it fits my play style, but I would not play it anywhere near as well as I play some of the silly random. Honestly, not as good decks that I play.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly like a balance to how you approach a game like Magic. I'm not even gonna try to like front with anyone that like I'm a good player. Like, I've been tracking my win losses at FNM events with Grixis Delver since I put it together. Definitely still below 500 after 3 weeks. But I mean, you experience variance. Like, some nights I'll just it literally feel like the deck like played itself. I didn't even have to do anything. But I know that with practice and experience and just more time, the ability to win the games that don't start like that will come, assuming the deck doesn't get nuked, which we kind of sort of already talked about that. I won't segue into it. But like, what I mean about the approach to a game like Magic being a balance is that, like, it is a heads up game. Like, we're sitting down across the table from another person, and the goal is to win. Like, you're supposed to like say, "Ha! I got you. You are done. You can't. You're done. I am the winner," and then you mark it down on a sheet. But at the same time, it's like this game that's like, it has. I mean, how many thousands of Magic cards are there? Like 20,000, 25,000, like different cards that they've printed over the years. Like, that's like a beautiful thing about it, because yeah, it's an insane number.
I might be
like
I don't know.
And I mean,
yeah, it's like 15,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
like there's so many there's so many cards that are cool. Like that's the thing. Like I like Deathrite Shaman. I think it's a cool ass Magic card. It's fun to play with. I think it's interesting to play against. The problem is that it's literally everywhere. Like it's just, and I mean, I'm with you, Sean, that I don't necessarily I'm on the fence about whether that's really a problem. But I mean, you can't deny the fact that it had a higher share of the metagame than Brainstorm, which has traditionally been like
I don't know about
thing.
that.
Like, but I don't know if that's a problem. Like I don't even if it does have more slots taken. Like, I mean, don't we want a card that's not blue to take more share? Even though, like, let's be honest, it probably should just
not blue.
asterisk blue card. Like, come on, guys, it's a blue card. But I mean, it also can be used by other non-blue decks, like like all the kind of ramp non-blue decks like Maverick, and I mean Nick Fit still plays it.
Dead Guy,
yeah, Dead Guy. Even though the only one of those that I think is actually like semi-competitive is Maverick. Like that plays into what we're talking about. Like, I do think that, like, especially at like weekly events, which is in my opinion the core of Legacy as a format. You can take those decks and you can go 4-0. Like, maybe you won't do it every week. You won't go 3-1 every week, but you'll do it and you'll have a blast doing it because that's what you wanted to do. Like, that's why you sleeved it up in the first place. And that is one of the best things about Legacy is, like, we're so entrenched. The format is so entrenched with what's actually good, but what's good is so efficient that you can, like, interchange the parts. Like, you can take the package from one deck and throw it into another. Like obvious examples like the Blue Shell, but I mean, you could look at Stoneforge Mystic or something like that. I mean, the deck I used to play, or that I actually will still play it because I'm not just throwing it away. Agrolome is a testament to that, because it's literally like 6 of the like best non-blue packages you can throw in a deck. Just put it into a deck, and it looks like a pile, but it actually like works quite well. And I think it's a really cool deck. Like, I don't know.
So here's a question for you guys, because I really don't want this to turn into like, and we kind of brought up like pros and cons for it, but I we've already done our piece on Deathrite Shaman, and I think it's a little bit too soon to revisit the issue. But I do want to ask you guys. We all know that there are pros and cons for banning any card in Legacy. Some have stronger like reasons for or against than others, but I want to ask you guys. What do you think of the idea that Grixis Delver is a good, say, best deck in the format? And I use best like very liberally. You can kind of talk about it as like it has the most like, I don't know if it actually has the most top 8s or the highest conversion rate or anything like that, but it does have like it has like the lion's share of the meta, and it regularly puts up top 8s, whether that be like the absolute most or not, I'm not sure. But what do you guys think of this idea that like, I do actually think, and I can't remember exactly who wrote it, but there was an interesting article on Channel Fireball talking about Grixis Delver is a good best deck for a number of reasons. Like, it's interactive, it's intuitive, people jumping from Modern to Legacy. It's not like Storm where you have to acquire an entire new skill set. You're kind of hinging a lot of your play on like the basics of Magic in terms of like card advantage being like, I guess in this case, it's like the Delver decks tend to rely more on like virtual card advantage from denying resources, but like resource management, counting down clocks, deciding like risk analysis, like do I want to tap out here or do I want to play something else? Stuff like that. It's getting a bit winded. What do you guys think of Grixis Delver being one of the top decks of the format? Do you think that's a good deck to represent the format?
I'd actually very much argue it is. And it's just because the decision trees you get with Grixis Delver, playing against it or playing it, wind up still being quite complex. I have no problem with decks that try to lock people out of the game. Prison decks are a big part of the format. That should be a part of it. But Grixis Delver is it's a very, yeah, it's a really good deck. But it very much rewards skilled play. you're always thinking several steps ahead. You get a lot of very interesting game states that you're trying to think through. I actually think it's I have no problem it being the top dog in the format. It's also one that's not that hard to attack. Like you can play decks that crush Grixis Delver. I mean, Lands is a classic case, but there are a lot of different ways you can attack it. Admittedly, then you're weak to other things. Like it's one of the advantages of it is that it's relatively even across the board. But I don't know. I think as things go, it's a healthier top deck than Miracles was, just because it is something that's much more interactive and much more leads to a more diverse metagame. But that would be my arm wavy argument for it anyway.
Yeah, I think the resurgence of Rug Delver is just a symptom of the metagame responding to it. A couple bolts in your main board that can deal with the Deathrite Shaman pretty easily.
So, as someone who actually I just got into the deck, my experience is somewhat limited. I kind of agree with what Joe was saying about it, how it's like it is even across the board, and that's one of the reasons that it's so good. It's very consistent, kind of plays out the same. You can definitely just face roll someone without really knowing what you're doing if you get a good draw. But I mean that's fine, But I think that this kind of goes into how the format has evolved. So does anybody remember the deck Zoo? First of all, when was the last time you played that deck? Well, I'll answer for you. It was when they printed Delver of Secrets, because why play Wild Nacatl when you can play the same card in a better color with evasion? Delver of Secrets, it's Wild Nacatl, but easier to use and with a better supporting cast. So the that used to be a pillar of the format, is the Zoo decks. But that's really what I think all of these Delver decks really are. I mean, there's some overlap with other archetypes too, but they really are Zoo decks. And I think Grixis Delver is the epitome of it, because look at its threat base. It's just it just has it all. It has everything you could possibly want out of a threat base. You've got the guy who doesn't use the attack stat to kill your opponent for 1 mana, and he also ramps. Great job. You have the 1 mana Tarmogoyf instead of 2 mana Tarmogoyf. You have the army in a can that it's good against all the things that the 1 mana Tarmogoyf is bad against. And then you have the nothing personal kid teleports behind you guy that you just can't interact with at all. He just stabs you in the back every time. And it's just the most diverse. Did I miss something? Is there a threat that I'm not thinking about? I think that's everything. You got Durs. And Delver. Yeah, just he's the forerunner. The progenitor or whatever. So you just have another all around decent in all categories. And that kind of goes into where we've been going as a game, as the game of Magic. In the beginning days of Legacy, from my understanding, because again I didn't play then, but I've heard people talk about it, I've read articles and stuff, and I've looked at deck lists a little bit. The balance of spells versus creatures has been tipping more towards the creature side due to recent printings. And I don't think you can avoid that, because they just can't just stop. Okay, we're gonna not print creatures that are better than the last creatures. They'll do their best, pick and choose where they make gains, but eventually you're going to end up with something like Grixis Delver. I mean, not Grixis Delver, sorry, Deathrite Shaman. You started with Curd Ape, and then you got, I don't know, what's another good one? You probably start with Savannah Lions and Curd Ape. And then you got Delver, I guess, because those were the pillars in the beginning. The creatures that you would play. Maybe Nimble Mongoose is a good one to mention there. And then you got Deathrite, you got True Name Nemesis in the place of Nimble Mongoose. You got Tarmogoyf, but that's just creep. That's years and years of cards being printed. That those the huge amounts of time between all those and that's just kind of where we've come with these decks and just the way that the card game works. But I don't know. I mean, I play the deck. I'm gonna enjoy it while I can. If they do ban something, I've got plans in the works to do something else, to play something else. I can always play Agrolome or something like it because I still have all those cards. I'm happy to be a legacy player, and I don't hate the meta. I don't hate the idea that there's this deck that's like so efficient, like, and just it just has everything. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I think we all kind of feel sort of similarly in that, like, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And not that I know any of your online handles or anything, but I just based off of what I've heard here, it doesn't sound like any of us are going online and posting angrily about how the legacy sky is falling and the format is doomed, and Wizards of the Coast has printed himself into a corner or anything like that.
There's other handles we don't talk about,
I mean, I don't know. They're good cards. I guess Mike, to summarize, like, do you feel as though Grixis Delver is like a good best deck for the format? Like, just yes or no?
Yeah, I think it is because the conversation about the cost of certain things out of like thrown to the side. There's things you can do that just wreck it, like you guys were saying. Like it was Joe. Like you can just sleeve up lands, and like that just matchup seems like unwinnable. Like I played against it a couple of times since I picked up Grixis Delver, and like it's just miserable. Just everything it's doing you can't interact with, and is like extremely good against what you're bringing to the table. But I mean, it's not to say you can't win as Grixis Delver. It's just not very favored. But I think it's fair enough, like, to say that it's the best deck. It's probably the most like balanced and consistent against like the average like meta, but your meta could be terrible for it. Who knows?
Any Chalice deck is really good against it, and there's a lot of those running around.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's like I think there's always going to be no deck is going to be like 50% against the entire field, but Grixis Delver does have a lot of the hallmarks of like a good flagship deck, so to speak. And it's like there's we're talking about matchups, it's pretty even across the board. I can't think of many where it's like, yeah, we're favored 90-10 against I don't know, a pile of like 60 basic planes or something maybe. But like probably a little more than 90-10 there. But there's honestly nothing I can think of where it's like any more than 60-40. And so but it's got like pretty even matchups all across. A lot of like important decision making involved. Pretty intuitive deck to play. Feels powerful, and I do think that's like something that should be like that is really important for like a representative deck of any format. Like, I don't know. You don't want a format where you're playing like a deck that wins games and just doesn't feel like it's doing too much, or like you're not making too many decisions.
Yeah. I guess I would summarize how I feel about it by saying that it has a very, like, not necessarily a low skill floor, but I mean, you understand how to play the game of Magic. You can play Grixis Delver decently, but I think it has a very high skill ceiling, meaning that there's a lot of decisions that you're going to cross over the game that seem innocuous, but if you make the wrong one too many times in a row, or like you make one wrong and then you make the next one wrong, like too many of instances in the game like that, you're gonna lose games that you could otherwise win. But that takes experience and practice and just like skill to really figure it out. And I think that's a good thing about it, that it's like you're saying, it's not really oppressive. Like, it's beatable, it's fair. It's not doing anything out of the ordinary. It's just extremely efficient and like a streamlined deck.
Right. Yeah. And so as much as I regularly have to like sort out my own personal opinions from like what I feel is objectively good for the format, but it's like I played Impact for several years. I loathe my Grixis Delver matchup, but all things said and done, I think it's fine. I wish a couple of other decks were a little bit stronger or had more of a meta representation, but honestly, it's there's not too much more you can ask for in a best deck, and I do think it is a step up from what we used to have in Miracles, which I think was pretty undisputedly the best deck at like before Top was banned.
Yeah.
Okay. a couple of other questions for you guys. So the format, I feel as though, I don't know about you guys, but just in the like over the course of this conversation, I do feel as though my perception has changed slightly. Whoops, excuse me.
No, like, get your face off of there. What are you doing?
Get out of here, Tim. I like it's like a very, it's still a very diverse format. And like there's sort of like the idea that like Brainstorm and like Deathright are crowding out certain decks is definitely has some validity to it, but at the same time, it's like I think if people really, if you look for a way to make it interesting again, I think you can find it. I think Mike is kind of an interesting position in that like he recently bought into Grixis Delver, and that's sort of just opened up like basically a whole new like a playbook of, I mean, whole new, how would you say, just like adventure for him in some ways, that he can now play this new deck and is dealing with interactions he's never dealt with before. And like all the things people love about Legacy, playing powerful cards, interacting with your opponents, sort of like taking these risks and seeing them pay off in big ways. He now gets to do that with Grixis Delver. I guess though, like for the rest of us, have you guys ever felt like you're just a little bit disenchanted with the format or with Magic in general and like kind of stepped away from it? Or what did you do to sort of fix that?
Well, I have a pretty decent collection, and so I'm able to play, and with help from friends that I can borrow pretty much any card ever. I always switch it up. So recently, when I started playing Blue Red Delver, actually didn't have to borrow anything for it. I fucking love the deck. It's kind of rejuvenated me, and yeah, I'm feeling pretty sweet about it.
Yeah, Joe, what about you?
I think there's definitely a time I was pretty bitter about things. I mean, the top ban for 12 posts, for blue green 12 posts is still around, but I don't like the prison style builds. I want to play show and tell. I want to play brainstorm. So, after top was banned and blue green post, which was never that great. Let's be honest. It hasn't been it's a really fun deck to play, and it's a deck that you invest a lot of time in playing well because it doesn't have a play style that's really anything like any other deck. Like it doesn't. What you learn there doesn't transfer well. So suddenly it being just really significantly worse was a big, that was a big drawback. But I mean, you switch decks, you play around, you have fun. I think one of the things for me that was just just jamming games with other decks. I mean, it's fun to play things that you've played against but haven't played before, or play something that's you've never played before. I think one of the things that helped me a lot was going and just borrowing a deck from somebody and playing something different and new that I'd seen a lot but never actually played. Like I borrowed lands from Patrick at one point, and we just jammed games, but I've never actually played lands, and it's really fun to suddenly be on the other side of that and kind of figure out the deck as you go. It's like even if you know the basic interactions, like actually knowing optimal lines and figuring out what to keep is really interesting. So I think that's one of the things that's always fun to swing back around. Like I'm pretty happy about Legacy now, but I think regardless if you're in a spot where you don't like it, is take a deck that it may be a common deck that you've played against 1,000 times, but actually try playing it, just figuring out what's the optimal line. It's really really fun, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely another, like a separate conversation to be had about sort of like the financial barrier. It seems as though all of us are, I mean, I know you guys, we all play Magic at the same shop, and so I think people in our community are very generous with their cards. Like, it's very easy to just borrow, hey, I need a playset of Snapcasters, or hey, I'm looking for 3 Underground Seas and 2 Volcanic Islands and a Scrubland because I'm playing some monstrosity tonight. And people are just like, yeah, I have these, or I don't have these, I have half of it, let me just loan it to you. I will say though, like, I consider us to be very lucky in that regard, in that we have access to these cards. Obviously, we own some of ourselves, but at the same time, like, if I wanted to play Eldrazi tomorrow, I don't own a single card out of that 75. I could probably do it.
Yeah, so what Sean is saying, don't be a dick. Become friends with a lot of people that have a bunch of Magic cards and have fun.
Buy them beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eat, drink, and be merry.
Well, that's like a feature, in my opinion, from what I've seen of the Legacy community. It's just in general, at every shop I've gone to play Legacy, that sort of like camaraderie among Legacy players exists, and I mean, I'm sure that extends into Vintage as well. Even though I haven't actually ever seen an event where it was all no proxies allowed, but like borrowing cards, like that's totally been something I've done. I've offered it to people. I've let people borrow a deck before. It's fine. Like, and it is a feature of the community. I think it's probably. I hesitate to go on a limb and say this, but maybe Legacy players and Eternal players in general are like kind of more down that path than players of other formats, because we know that, like, our cards are what they are. Like, they're I don't know what I'm trying to say, but just Legacy players are awesome, and yeah, go Eternal Match. I don't know.
Yes.
I agree. We are awesome. All of us are awesome people. I mean, we're better individuals and greater moral fiber than any of our like rotating format counterparts, for example.
Yeah,
I've borrowed a full power from somebody at the shop on multiple occasions. Like, I'm traveling across state lines with $11,000-$12,000 worth of somebody else's Magic cards.
Yeah, Ben Kendrick let me borrow.
TSA sloppily going through them.
I did the same thing for Eternal Weekend. I borrowed 4 Bazaar at Baghdad, and I was just like, when you stop and think about it, like, no one would ever just say, like, here's a stack of, like, here's like $3,000 worth of cards, or here's like $3,000, like, hold on to it and return it to me after the weekend, like. But I don't know. There's just something. I don't mean to use the word magical to make light of the situation, but it is pretty incredible that, like, I think Mike, what you're getting at, you were almost quite there. It's just like, we kind of understand, like, this is how you grow the community, and it's like the numbers are dwindling, really just because of how difficult. I truly believe Vintage and Legacy are like phenomenal formats, and I think they're both exciting and fun to play and offer a lot of things that Standard and Modern don't. Not to say that this should be everybody's favorite format, but it really is a shame when, like, and you guys know this too, but like, it's a shame when, like, you want to play these formats and you just don't have $3,000 to drop on cardboard.
Yeah.
Not to say like that, if you have $3,000 sitting around, go to your store and buy into a Legacy deck, but it's just like, this is like a game, and it is a great game, but like the barrier to entry should not be so great.
Yeah.
Magic cards are meant to be played. I think that's the best way to boil it down, right? Like, yeah, it's unfortunate that the value of these things is so astronomical, but like, between players, like, we understand that, and that's how that's the best way to like develop that bond with another Magic player, is that, like, we agree that the value of the cards is beyond what they can be exchanged for in currency. Like,
Absolutely. I'm sitting here looking at my blue-red standstill deck, and it's probably worth.
Hold on, pause, everyone. Blue-red standstill. Just want to point out, everybody's saying the format is stale. He's playing a blue-red standstill,
and I went undefeated at our last weekly. And I'm looking at it, it's that's probably a $3,000 deck. I wouldn't sell it for $5,000.
Yeah.
And also too, I mean, anyone in an Eternal Magic, in the communities, every player has a vested interest in seeing the format grow and there be more people to play against. So I mean, I think everywhere you go, people want to lend people cards. People want to get new players up to speed. People want to get people excited about it. And yeah, it is partly because we've all put absurd amounts of money into these pieces of cardboard, and that's a little scary if you really think about it. But I mean, the cards are meant to be played. Everyone's wants to see more people play the format. I mean, I think that's one of the nice things about it. I mean, I think the barrier to entry is a real problem, but I guess one of the the upsides is that you do have a lot of people very motivated to see the format grow. And yeah, I think part of that is because they've all got quite a bit invested in it. So I don't know. There need to be more proxy events, but that's another story entirely.
For sure. And I think, like, you know, what we're doing with vintage events is, you know, something incredible, just because vintage is not a format that people regularly get to play, but I do think it offers a lot to the game and to gameplay that you wouldn't be able to find in any other format. Like, I don't know, there's another format where you go like, oh yeah, turn 2, like turn 1, Island Mox Time Walk. Turn 2, like, Lotus crack Snapcaster Time Walk, go again. Like, turn 3, Tinker Blight steals some other nonsense.
Like in modern, a trope is Bolt Snap Bolt. In vintage, you get Recall Snap Recall. It's fucking awesome, man. So
yeah, no, it really is great. Tim, to add on what you were saying earlier, though, I like, you were saying, like, you have your deck in front of you, and like if you like tallied it up on TCG Player, it might be worth like $3,000. But you wouldn't sell it for $5,000. And I feel exactly the same way as you do. But I also, like, if somebody wanted to borrow it, I would just let them. You know, like, yeah, hey, you know, like, you go to the, you know, like, obviously, like, I feel like I would want to know the guy a little bit first. But like, if I see a person who kind of been hanging around at the Legacy scene who's been like trying to put together a deck, and he's like, oh, you know, like, I have Modern Infect, I'm really looking to build like Legacy Infect, but the drops are just so damn expensive, I would just hand them the deck box.
Yeah.
Like, and so there's sort of this weird, like, double standard.
It goes into just don't be a dick. Just like, I don't know, for some of you out there, most of you are probably nice guys, but if you are a dick, quit acting like a dick and garner more friends, and we can all do this together.
Tim Everett, ladies and gentlemen, just dropping knowledge on us, dropping wisdom.
Words of wisdom.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. I don't know. Be smart with your cards. Don't give them to strangers and then be upset when a guy like walks off with them or something, and then try to sue the Lone Star Lorgoyfs for, I don't know, whatever dumb reason you come up with.
Spreading too much goodwill. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we made the world too difficult, and then someone took advantage of it and scammed us all. Like, in our next podcast, we'll be playing Standard because we gave away our collections to a Nigerian prince or something.
Okay,
we should do that fake cast. Like, oh, that'd be funny.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't mean to poke fun at it. Tim, I definitely do agree with you. I think I don't know, not to get preachy, but in a broader sense, you know, it's not just about Magic, but it's like, Magic, I think, is where it really manifests itself a lot, because I think like there are these stereotypes of Magic players, and let's be honest, a lot of them aren't really good stereotypes, you know? Like, you don't want to be associated with a hobby where it's like, oh, that's the card game where people don't shower regularly, right? And it's like, that has nothing to do with the card game. But, you know, if that is somebody's first impression, I mean, what can you do or say about it? Yeah.
Yeah. Crackgate.
Crackgate. Crack the earth. Okay. We're getting a little bit off topic. I kind of want to wrap this up. We've been going for looks to be about an hour and a half. But I guess sort of keeping things fluid, but like, what do you guys do to prevent from like burning out, let's say?
I play other games. Like, I play a lot of computer games. Specifically like first-person shooter games. It's very, very different than Magic. There's not a whole lot of variance in them, which is something that, honestly, variance is one of the hardest things to deal with, like, I think, emotionally about Magic, because sometimes you just did everything right and you still, like, got wrecked.
Right, yeah.
But in a lot of other games that are kind of more like, well, I mean, in the case of a first-person shooter being a Twitch-based game, it's like, you know, you know what you're supposed to do, and as long as you execute correctly, you can usually always win. The only time you lose is if somebody's actually physically faster than you, and that's a little bit easier to like swallow than like, oh well, the random nature of the stack of cardboard sheets that I throw around on a neoprene playmat kind of just screwed me out of a win here, and I, you know, am not happy anymore. Like, it's like, well, nope, that guy was actually just physically better than me. There's nothing I can do about that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like when I've been burnt out on Magic, I just focus on other games because I'm a gamer. Like I'm gonna play games no matter what. But Magic is the best game, so
yay.
Got to keep it fresh because and the real point to that. Sorry to go a little bit long with this, but when you do take a break and you come back, it's like starting all over again, which is just like it's so much better. Like like it is literally like starting all over again. You have to relearn stuff. You'll forget about things. It's just you can't avoid that, and that's like part of the charm. And it kind of you get to relive that again.
So I think what Mike is saying, we should all quit Magic, so we can experience it for the first time again.
I mean, in a microcosm, I guess, or like that's like a little just sort of, but no, yeah, seriously, quit Magic, sell your collection, buy CS:GO, learn Russian, and you're off to the races.
We're a Valve stream now, by the way, or who makes I don't know who makes CS:GO, but we're just a bunch of like PC game shills now, so
yeah.
Is Halo still a thing, Mike?
The last Halo game that was released on PC was Halo 2, as far as I know, and that was like, damn, I'm old, like almost 10 years ago. But no, Halo does still exist on console. I just don't play console.
Yeah, the last Halo game was released when Zoo was still a deck, for some perspective. So,
personal achievement: I shot a rocket out of the air with a rocket.
Nice.
In a game of Capture the Flag, and it mattered. It was nobody fucking saw it, and all my friends still think I'm fucking lying about it, but I did it. Okay.
Joe, what about you? What do you like to do to avoid the burnout? To avoid the breakdown?
I'm gonna give the cliche old man answer and say I like go for a walk. No, I mean like I work pretty long hours from I can't say actually Tim works way longer hours than I do, but I work from home, so I'm it's like work is usually the burnout thing. So for Legacy, if I'm not enjoying it, I'll just do other things. I mean, like I've usually got enough stuff to do that it just means like, yeah, I'll go whatever, do something else. Usually, weirdly enough, Magic is my this is gonna sound ironic as hell, but it's my way of getting like face-to-face time with people. It's my social interaction. I don't really play online that much. I play paper, and yeah. So I mean, it's even if I'm not really feeling it, it's cool just to go and hang out and chat with people. And so yeah, if I don't do that, if I'm really feeling burned out about it, I go hang out with the same people and don't play Legacy. I guess that's basically what it boils down to.
Yeah, we're a sour bunch. Try not to hang out with us too much if you can help it. Yeah. I do kind of want to toss out sort of an anecdote. Something happened pretty recently at my LGS, and I wanted to share it with you guys on this topic. I think it was like I think we host Legacy at Asgard Games in Houston on Thursdays, so like Thursday evenings and then Saturday afternoons. And so I think this was like a Thursday evening, which typically has, I want to say, the lower turnout rate, just because it's the middle of the week and it's in an evening. People can't always make it. But the strangest thing happened, and I think at the time I was feeling really burnt out on Magic. I went to Eternal Weekend. I played Infect. I kept losing to Grixis Delver. I was 1 win short of us. And then the other night, I want to say this is about a month ago, I went there, and there's usually like a pretty predictable crowd for Legacy. You see a lot of the same people. It's not a format that people like. You'll just, I mean, at most you'll see like maybe 2 or 3 new people coming to Legacy night. But we went there. I think Tim, you might have been there, and we had about 9 people.
Yeah.
In total, it was like you, me, and then 7 guys I had never seen before at Legacy.
Yeah, there was a fuckload of new people.
Yeah, and that was incredible. Like that night was fantastic. I don't even remember how I did that night, but like I was like thrilled to be around people who were thrilled to be playing Legacy. Like, I don't remember what I was playing that night. I don't remember what my matchups were. I don't remember who was there. My round one opponent was on Bog Delver with 2 Leovolds, and I remember talking to him and him being like really excited to get into the format, having to like transition from modern, and then having like, a little bit of like money lying around and thinking that like the deck looks awesome. I think I beat him, but there was some really close games. Like they were like good games and interactive games, and you know it's always really great to see someone walk away from a loss with like a big smile on their face. That was one of the highlights of the night. I was watching like Bug Delver play against Blue White Stoneblade, except the Stoneblade guy didn't have like he was playing like Spellstutter sprites and spell quellers, and it was incredible. Like watching this guy, like the opponent like has a Yumizawa's Jitte and like equipping them with Vendilion Click and attack, and he's like, okay, flash and Spellstutter sprite trade, and it was like, holy shit, this is so great. At another point, the guy, the bug guy, has a backbreaking, like a game winning Liliana the Veil, and he plays it, and then the other guy like spell quellers it, which like no one saw coming. Just like random moments like these, and you know, like everyone laughing about it and having a great time, just sort of the way people used to feel about Legacy. I found that just like surrounding myself with those people completely changed my outlook on the format. Like all of a sudden I felt like this is not a bad format. This is okay. I'm a little bit burnt out, but I shouldn't be looking at it in a way that, you know, like that demonizes the format. And I definitely think like there's a couple of people in our playgroup who are a little bit guilty of that as well. Like myself, for the last couple of months, I've just been very, very negative about it. If you find yourself playing with people like that, I mean, just don't. Not to say you have to like cut ties with them, but you know, find people who love Legacy. If you love Legacy and you're with a bunch of people who don't love Legacy, you know, like change your scene a little bit. Try going to a new shop if you're lucky enough to have one of those in town. Another weekly events. You don't have to hang out with the old curmudgeon-y people who are gonna like kind of gripe about it every time they lose turn 1 or something, or like, you know, with like Force of Will backup. Instead, I mean, I don't know, there's so much to love about the format. It's so deep, there's so much going on. Even you can play the same 2 decks against each other like 100 times, you'd have 100 different games. I don't know, like just find what works for you and change your scene if you have to.
Just a couple of weeks ago we had GP Houston, and although it wasn't a Legacy main event, there were some side events, and I pretty much played those all weekend. And pretty much half of my opponents were Asgard players, and I fucking loved it. It was just like I know we're like as the crow flies, we're about 6 miles away from Asgard, and it was pretty cool. You get to see your Magic friends in a slightly higher stakes format. It was pretty sweet, man.
One thing I'd like to just touch on here is I agree that like the strategies that you just outlined, Sean, in order to that the one can use to like kind of deal with those problems like toxic players or people with just kind of bad attitudes about it, or just, you know, yes, change your shop, change your meta, go somewhere else if possible, but we always have to keep in mind that that's not possible for every Magic player. There's people who probably play a lot of Magic who can't play Legacy at all anywhere. Like, I know that I'm so fortunate where I live that I can actually play 3 to 4 times a week Legacy, like 3 to 4 rounds. That's so rare. Like, even when I lived in Chicago before I moved here, there was I tried so hard to find other stores that played it. The best I could do was twice a month. It depends on where you are. Unless, of course, you play Magic Online, which is obviously an option. I don't myself, although I've been thinking a little bit more about it recently, but I'm not convinced yet. But you know, we have to keep in mind as Legacy players that, you know, we are kind of in a minority of overall Magic players because it's just not accessible. It's so expensive, and because of that, there's not that many people that play it, and because of that, there's not that many events. And then also, for the people who live in less Legacy dense areas, they probably experience worse experiences going to tournaments because people who are going to go to those are going to have to travel further, and they're going to have more invested in it, so they're going to obviously try to play the best decks more. and you maybe will see less like funness and like, you know, attempted innovation that you might see in a place like Houston or in a place like Austin, where there's multiple shops within a easy driving or public transit distance, with different players or even some of the same players too. But I mean, not to like say that the strategies you're outlining, like do what you can, but we have to keep in mind that like if somebody doesn't like the format, maybe it's not their fault. Then maybe there's anything you can do about it, but it just is what it is. Like I don't know. That's not really like a very good way to end what I was saying, but
you're good, man. Like you make solid points, and I really love what you're saying. And then at the very end, you just kind of say like, I don't know what I'm saying. It's like, no, you do know what you're saying. Like you're making some good points. It's good. It's good. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I certainly don't mean to assume that everybody has Weekly Legacy firing like twice a week around them and like a vibrant scene with, you know, really invested in like, you know, enthusiastic players. But, you know, like, yeah, you're right. That like not everybody has that. And Moto is, I would agree in that it's not necessarily a replacement for that. That being said, you know, I imagine anybody listening to our podcast is, at least I would hope, someone who's been playing Legacy for a while or like is interested in the format or has some means and some experience in playing Legacy. Or I guess Vintage, because we're also a Vintage podcast, right? Yeah. So, but like with that in mind, you know, like, I don't know. I hate to see people just like give up on the format just because, not to say that things aren't breaking their way, but it's like, you know, I understand people love different things about the format. It's not the same as it used to be, but that doesn't have to be a bad thing either. We've talked about it at length in this podcast, and you know, outside of it too. There's a lot of really great things about like all the cards being printed. You know, the way things are going. I don't know. I brought up this top eight of this recent weekly challenge for Legacy, and like the second place list was playing 2 Direfleet Daredevils, which are the red Snapcaster mages, and then like a red-white Taxes deck. Like that's new technology right there. And red-white Taxes isn't like no one's looking at that as like the oppressive deck of the format. Like, oh my gosh, I just wish they would ban, I don't know, whatever's in that deck, like Pia and Kira and Nalar. Also like going a little bit further down, there was a big Eldrazi deck playing 3 copies of Azor's Gateway. That looks incredible, you know? It's that weird, for those that don't know, it's the card that 2 mana, tap a colorless, tap it, you draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. Then if you've exiled 5 cards with like different converted mana costs, you flip it over. And then it turns into a legendary land that taps for X mana of any color where X is your current life total. Which that side is less relevant. It's really just about giving like those big Eldrazi decks a way to filter through the cards. But I mean, gameplay aside, you know, like there's always things to be doing. And you know what? I'm actually going to talk to Sam about this because I would love to link that top 8. I think there's a lot of room to explore this format. Maybe the top is already like kind of cemented into place or solidified. It's probably not going to budge too much. I can't imagine Grixis Delver or Czech Pile kind of falling by the wayside. They're just so efficient in what they do, and what they do is very strong. But the tier below that, you know, and this is Legacy has always been a format where people play what they love, not necessarily like what's best. I think there's a lot of things there that people just haven't taken a look at or haven't spent the time to sort of investigate and see what could flourish and exist in that space.
I think that's a good summary of the entire thing. It's like, yeah, I mean, Grixis Delver and Czech Pile are extremely good, extremely efficient, and tight lists, but Tier 2 is exciting, and Tier 2 is not as bad as it's. I do think Tier 2 is more about like fitting your playstyle to your deck and doing better because of it. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. That's the best part of it. But that's just my overly optimistic opinion in some ways.
No, I mean that's I think that's what we need. The format's never going to survive if you know, like you call it overly optimistic, but it's just like, I don't know, that like you can't have a format full of people who are upset about the format. That's not a good format, you know, like come play Legacy. We all hate it. Like that's not something that's going to draw anybody to it. You know, and a lot of things that made it great are, oh gosh, I didn't just say that. But a lot of the things that like are great about the format are still there, even if there's a lot of things that have been changing to make it look different than it has in the past.
100%. I 100% agree with that. Like, I don't know. I think one of the best ways that we can try to mitigate, because I mean, you go on MTG The Source, that's the best possible example I can think of right now of just the toxicity, not necessarily toxicity, but just like negativity about it. Like, but keep in mind always that in any sphere, in any environment, the most vocal people are the most extreme. They have the most extreme opinions. And like the vast majority of people who play Legacy are still playing Legacy, and they're not even talking about it on the internet because they don't care. They just want to play. Like maybe they're getting in there and they're doing some strategy stuff, but they're not the ones who are like forum warrior, like, you know, Julius Caesar, like 50,000 posts or something. Yeah, like, yeah, you know, like we just you just have to, like, you have to go to events and like try to organize events, grassroots. That's what we're doing here in Austin with the Lone Star Lurgoyfs. I guess this is a good way to segue into the proxy event that's coming up on the 24th of February. Lone Star Lurgoyfs and ATX MTG present Romancing the Stones #2, Austin's 100% proxy-friendly vintage cash tourney. It's going to be hosted at Austin Beerworks this time around. Again, that's February 24th. And all ages are welcome. Entry fee will be $10 with 100% of the entry money raised going to the top 4. Will be split among them if they play it out or choose to split. Registration begins at 12:30 p.m. With a 1 p.m. tournament start time. Deck lists will be collected, not even necessarily, not for rules enforcement or deck list enforcement purposes, just so that we can post them at the end of the event. This is meant to be kind of more less of a competitive thing and more of just come and experience the vintage format and all that it has to offer. And there is a Facebook page here on Facebook called @Romancing the Stones, and more will be going out about that. We can probably put a link here in the podcast. Anybody who's listening, you can find it there at the end. And we will have more information about the proxy policy and some other info as well to be released soon.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you guys are doing. I don't know. It's just like Magic is a great game, and I think it's really fantastic that there are some more proactive members of the community taking the steps to sort of make it into something that they enjoy. Yeah, Vintage, for example, is something that did not exist before Sam Craven started hosting proxy vintage events at Brash Brewery, you know, combining his love of busted restricted Eternal cards and craft beers. And so like now from that, we are doing these 25, 30 person like vintage events all the way in Austin, Texas, you know, and it's grown in such an incredible way to become something so awesome. When it just started from people being passionate about, quite frankly, something that's not too difficult to be passionate about. Magic is a great game. Okay, final thoughts, you guys. We've been going for about 2 hours. I told myself every time I listen to one of these, I'm just like, oh God, these are too long. If I'm ever hosting one, I'm just going to cut it off at like 45 minutes. But I do think we've been going on for a little bit of a long time now. Do you guys have anything else you want to add to the topics we discussed, or to shout outs, or anything else really?
If you live in Houston and you want to come and try Legacy, shoot me a PM at Diarrhea Soup on Twitter, and I can bring you a deck. And
sorry,
if I can't, then someone else can bring you a deck.
Is that Diarrhea Suits spelled exactly as it sounds?
Diarrhea Soup. Yep.
Get a spoon.
Okay. Yeah. Diarrhea Soup. Yeah. Got it.
What a way to let yourself be known as on the internet.
Joe is Diarrhea Soup _2.
That's
minus wood chunks.
I'm just imagining some post-apocalyptic movie in which like the records are dug up and Tim has all these like tournament finishes under his belt, and now they're looking at this great warrior diarrhea suit who's managed to destroy everything in his path, and he's incredible and powerful, and nobody can stop him in his running greatness. Anyway, Joe, Mike, do you guys want to add anything else? By the way, Tim, that's really awesome of you. Yeah, I'll throw I guess I'll throw my hat in as well. Like anybody who's in the Houston area who happens to be listening to this or knows anybody in the Houston area who like might be interested in Legacy, like please reach out to us. You know, like I think we have a fantastic community. I think this is a great format. Don't let the reserve list be what stops you from experiencing this.
Yeah, I think
so, Mike, anything you guys want to add? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to shout out to anybody in Austin. If you play Legacy, I much appreciated. Please keep coming out to events. And please do try if you are interested. I can recommend Pat's Games in Austin, located at 2308 Hancock Drive, Austin, as well as Mothership Books and Games. Sorry. Located at 2021 West Palmer Lane. Those are the two shops I play at the most. They have great Legacy events every week. Lone Star Lurgois, everybody in this loose collection of card game people. Great job. Love you guys. I'm out. Thank you.
Joe?
Yeah, nothing really to add. Cardboard is good. I like Legacy. If you're in Houston and want to borrow a deck, I can help. I don't have quite the collection other people do, but you know. Yeah.
All right. So on that note, I'm Sean Liu here with Tim Everett, Joe Kington, and Mike O'Malley. Thank you so much, guys, for devoting the better part of your evenings to this. But I really enjoyed this conversation we had. And to all of you listening at home, I hope this was good for you guys as well, or wherever you're listening to this. Anyway, y'all have a great night or morning, afternoon. We'll see you later.